I'm showing you the way, a good way to go about blanking it up where it won't crack. In other words, this is what we call a whole log section, which is, something of this nature right here. We're looking in the end of it like this. And from here on out, I'm going to call this what we call a half log blank. Those are the two basic blanks that we get out of wet woods. You're typically going to start with something of this nature or something in the whole log nature. If you got a big enough tree, you're going to have some half log pieces that don't necessarily have bark on it. The most important thing to do with wet wood, if you're going to try to save it and try to dry it and use it, is you got to get rid of this pith. That pith runs everything. Most of the time, if you're getting it somewhere where they're taking it down, it's probably already rotten in the pith, or you'll find a lot of it that will be rotten in the pith. You find a really nice big mesquite tree somewhere down around Hamlin or Abilene or somewhere around in there. I guarantee you, if it's this big around, the pith's going to be rotten in it, and you can't hardly do much with it until you get it completely away. That's going to be the case most of the time in the woods you get. If you will take it and cut, you will see a little bit of difference in color. It's not, a lot of time it's not real evident, but you'll see usually a little bit of difference in the pith, especially if it's a grain porous wood. If it's a really tight grain wood like mesquite, you don't see as much difference. Maple, you won't see as much difference. But honey locust, mulberry, elm, all of that stuff, you're going to have a little bit different color here where the pith is. So you want to cut it completely out. Now you can quarter saw it and come back here and save these blanks off of this part, but you need to get rid of that pith completely to come up with a half log blank, which is what most people start out with bows. A whole log, if you hollow a whole log, then you're hollowing in grain, that's not a problem if you know how. But it's a whole lot harder than starting with a half log blank and cutting, face grain. So what you need to do is you need to get your log blanked up, whichever way you're going to cut it, till you have pieces kind of like I was showing you here. I guess I ought to set that back out here. And of course that all depends on the size lathe you have, and you can do this with limbs and everything else. Nothing changes as far as how you handle the wood. If you wrap it up in stretch wrap and it's still damp, then the fungus and everything else that's in the wood naturally is going to cause it to spalt. If you want it to spalt, that's fine. Randy and I do that all the time on different wood, especially hackberry and some things that we can get relatively close around here. Spalt's really great. Gives you the black and the blue colors and some of the black spalting lines. But you have to watch it extremely close when you're doing that, because there's about a half a second between spalted like you wanted and yellow rot, which is a nightmare. And that way you just got to pitch it most of the time. I fight it sometimes to save something else really pretty, but it's a real hassle. And so if you want to spalt your wood, wet wood, that's not a problem. Wrap it up in stretch wrap, put it in a dark place and forget about it for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then take it out and look, because some of it's going to spalt more than others. Some woods are more susceptible to fungus and different things than other woods are. And Randy and I got some box elder that was just solid white at Waco 4 or 5 years ago, and we wrapped it up in stretch rack and took it out about 3 months later, and it's black as his coat back there. And of course, some of it stayed black, some of it was white, but we scraped off about 1/4 inch of mold on it. It'll grow faster than you think. And so if you're going to try to spot it, you have to watch it real close or you'll lose your piece of wood, because once it gets spotted pretty good, then it starts taking on yellow rot, and it'll turn to dust before you know it. But cutting wet wood is a lot of fun. It gives you access to a tremendous amount of good material that's doable. Whether it's a limb this big around you put on your mini lathe, or whether you've got an outboard set of pedal block blandings and are turning 4-foot diameter wall hanging or something. It doesn't make any difference. You can turn it wet. You have to remember it's critical, really critical, to turn it the same thickness all the way through. It's going to be in the center.
Not on branches.
And other things as well, you know, especially some mesquite, you know, you've got to decide what you want to save. You want to save a real deep bow, then you can do like this, or you want to save a wide bow, and you can come back like this. But you've got to get that pith area out of there, no matter where it's at in the log. And it ain't always going to wind up there. In fact, about half the time, especially in our part of the world, it's not going to be
See my pit.
If we're looking at a roughed out, say a real simple roughed out bow blank like this, and let's say we're going to rough it out at 15%, it's going to look something like this. But what you have to do is you have to take into account this thickness. So you need to come in here and rough this out something more like this and get rid of this, because if you don't keep that total thickness, it's going to crack. It's going to web crack in here like this. And you know, in our world, a crack is a crack. You know, if it is a natural phenomenon like a fissure or something in a crotch where the wood's twisted itself or something like that, you can make it look pretty good. But just a structural crack in the meat of the wood, it's hard to do anything left that you're going to be happy with. You know, I put turquoise in them. We put fiberglass in them, and all that stuff works. And if you do a little artwork on it, a lot of times you can make them look a whole lot better than what they would if they were just a crack. But a crack is a crack. You know, and to woodturners, that's not cool. You know, unless it's a natural fissure in the wood, that's a whole different ballgame. But if you want to keep your wood from cracking, you have to work at it. You have to follow the procedures, and that whole cabinet is full of wood. I started about 10 years ago, my wife and I, and you'd be surprised how quick that you're going to get a whole mountain of wood if you'll go around to the tree cutters, and when you see them doing a new construction project or they're taking out some trees, you can have a mass of really good quality wood if you just put out a little work and a little effort. Now, this club is one of the most important things to me that you can imagine. You know, me and 4 other guys started this thing about 10 years ago, and I've just loved it. It's been wonderful. But it's like anything else. If you want to get any joy and any real achievement out of it, then you have to work at it. You have to put out some effort. And the effort in the doing and the fellowship that you gain from a place like this is just incredible. And I've met some fantastic people. I've met some incredible craftsmen. You know, some incredible craftsmen. Where'd Dick go? Dick Markham back there has forgotten more than I'll learn in 10 more lifetimes. And there's some guys here that can really help you with a lot of different things. And this club has gotten to the point where we've got a lot of expertise in here. We've got several people in here that are good machinists, can help you with tools and different things like that. Glenn's not here today. He's the best machinery mechanic I've ever seen. You know, and I've been in that kind of work all my life. You know, James Kessler back here is really good on that sawmill. You know, and you tell James, you know, man, I'm looking for something like such and such. You know, sooner or later he's going to run across it. He's got some really nice yellow elm that he's curing out now that's going to be really pretty. And if you got something you're thinking about that you want that's really special, you might ask him, keep an eye for it, you know, and he's not going to hurt you if you're wanting a nice piece of wood, you know. He's got to pay for that saw, but boy, he's brought some nice stuff over here. The other thing I want to mention, talking about wet wood, is I'm fortunate enough to have a fairly decent sized bandsaw. And so if you need me to have some logs out for you, if you don't have a bandsaw, I can do that. For shop, if you've got a bandsaw, then to make you a set of circles. So when you half your log out, and it don't have to be halved out like this, it can be chainsaw cut, it's no problem. But it makes it a lot better if you will circle it out. And you make you some plywood circles, screw it in the top of it, run it through the bandsaw, and you've taken about maybe a good 2/3 of the balance problem out of it by that one step. And it makes it a whole lot safer. That wood, I always cut the center through the bark and through the sapwood enough to where you have good ability for your spur drive to fit. You also have a good spot for your tailstock center to seat. Off and that corner off, but on the lathes we have today, it really isn't worth the trouble. You know, and it will run balanced pretty well like this. When you put your spur drive in, I'm going to put the spur drive in this way. Typically, I'm going to mount it this way if I'm going to make a bowl coming up here. If I want to save the natural edge, then I'm going to mount it like this and cut me a pinion on the back side. Does that make sense? And then I'll turn it around, mount it on a chuck, and cut the bark to make, if I wanted to make a natural edge piece. Now, natural edge piece, if you're going to save and make your natural edge piece, then you know, get you a breathing mask on and a set of goggles, because that cyanoacrylate will fry your brain. I think that's what my problem is now. I breathe too much of it. You take the real thin cyanoacrylate and come in here about an inch and a half, and you just soak it. And you turn it up edgeways after that cures a little bit, and you soak all of the sapwood and the grain line wood around here, and 90% of the time you're going to save your natural edge. And I've done that to this piece, and I've got another piece over here that I've done that to. Cutting wet wood is fun. Man, if you ever get to cutting wet wood, it is a lot of fun. It cuts easy. You could get something where you can see it pretty quick. The thing you have to remember is you have to leave it thick enough to allow for it to dry. You know, so if this is basically a 10-inch diameter blank, then you need to leave it at least 1 inch thick. In West Texas, you better leave it at least an inch and a quarter, inch and a half thick, because we're so dry here that I think the national standard is 10%. Well, with our lack of humidity and our wind and the way things are typically here in West Texas, you need to allow a little bit more than that. And but we can chuck up a piece and like we're going to put a natural edge on it. We can chuck up a whole log piece. A roughing gouge will cut this without any problem. But when you come around here and hit the end grain on a half bowl blank, it's going to grab the end grain there and it's going to break this roughing gouge right here at this tang, or it's going to be like mine, and it's going to have a kink in it where I hit a knot once. It's going to bend it here, and it's a killer. I mean, it can kill you. Oh, yeah. You know, you can cut your arm off in that table saw, and you can cut all your fingers off in that band saw, and you can bring back a real nub in that joiner back yonder, but this machine will kill you. You know, you throw a blank like that off of this thing, you know, and like some of these guys turn so fast, I don't turn fast like that. But if you're spinning that thing and you tear a pinion off or you strip out, actually the safest way to do is between centers. That's probably the safest thing you could do, especially if you drill in and set a little bit of a cup for your drive. Yes, Jim.
Would you talk about the screws and how long those screws in that faceplate and what kind?
Okay. I'll get to that. Please remember, this tool is made to go with the grain, with the axis of the lathe. It is not to cut end grain with. And this has end grain on two sides, and it'll come around there, and it can break this thing. And it can cause I've never broke one, I've bent one, but I broke the end right off the tool rest, just whew.
At SWAT last year, Stuart Batty said that in a few years back, Craft Supply received over 100 a year, where they'd break and they'd send it back, and they were replacing it. And then after about 3 years of that, they said no more.
No, it's just, you know, it's not going. A gouge is cut out of a solid piece of steel. You know, it's not a formed cutting tool like this. This is why this cuts so slick. When you're going roughing out across here, you have a formed cup, cuts really good, you know, used the way it's supposed to use. When that end grain comes around and drags it, this doesn't have enough tensile strength and enough meat in this shaft to overpower the torque that's on this lathe. When you got this thing spinning at 300, 400 RPM here, it's spinning at 800 or 900 out here. And when you grab that, this thickness of steel will not handle the torque that's on this thing. Your bowl gouge will handle that kind of torque. This solid piece of steel, unless you got some little bitty pin cutting bowl gouge up there. If you have a typical, you know, 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch bowl gouge, you're not going to have any trouble. Now, if you got something like that great big piece back yonder on here, you know, and you're turning it at 800 RPM here at the spindle, I don't want to be in the room.
Yeah, it's screaming.
You know, because this edge out here, buddy, is sickening. You know, and if you hang something even on a soft blank like that out here, you know, you're really messing around. You do not need to run this machine any faster than the wood will cut. You know, now, you know, there's a lot of guys that'll argue that point with you a lot. You need RPM to even out pieces that aren't round. That really helps. If you're cutting square bowls or you're cutting natural edge out around mesquite platters, RPM helps shorten the distance between cutting wood and cutting air when it's not round. That's its best purpose. But you don't need to be spinning it that fast until you have it in as balanced as well as you can, until you have the big part of the meat out of it. Because it's just, it won't cut as fast as it's turning. And what that does, if you know anything about steel, if you're not removing the material at the rate that that's coming around there, then you're slipping. It's like you sitting on, like Randy used to do, pour oil under the back tires and create a smoke cloud. You know, you're just spinning them tires. It's a hell of a lot of fun, but you ain't moving any iron. I mean, you ain't moving any wood. And if you're not moving any wood, it doesn't matter whether it's a joiner, a table saw, a band saw, a planer. If you're not moving wood, then you're creating heat because you're not taking it away. That's why a gullet on a rip blade is so important. You got to have enough gap in there to get rid of the wood, because if not, you're not moving wood, and when you slip, you create heat, which doesn't cut. It just dulls your tool. So you don't need to cut any faster than what the wood will allow you to cut, and the sharpness of your tool. Any faster than that, you're producing heat, and you're just dulling your tool. That gets real technical, but it's a fact. I have to deal with that with stainless steel. That's what I do for a living, and stainless steel doesn't cut like anything else there is. The slower you can go with a hacksaw, the faster you're going to cut. And you can just drop right through something. If you got one of these guys that, I get these helpers up here, and boy, they're excited, they want to work, and boy, they just, you know, they took the set and the sharp off that tooth in about the first 2 seconds, and it's worthless from then on. You know, you cut a piece of half-inch stainless steel shaft, you drop that piece off of there in just a minute or two, because you're removing the material. This other way, you're just burning the edges of the teeth, you know, and you ain't got nothing. This works the same way to an extent. You know, the faster you are, the less resistance you have to the cut. And when you get the bulk of it cleaned up and you're really trying to get slick and smooth, then you go sharpen that knife just as sharp as you can sharpen it. And you let it get on up there at a high RPM, but you just float it down. You're cutting a 1/16 of an inch, maybe, of wood. You're not taking a 1/4 inch cut off of it like what we're talking about here with wet wood, because you can't remove the wood that fast. Let's see, I guess the other thing we need to talk about, whichever way we mount this, it doesn't make any difference for what I'm talking about here. If you're going to cut a lot of wet wood, get you a real hammer. It's not that big a deal. You know, if you use a steel hammer on this, which is what you need to do, you need to get it in the wood. You can beat on this thing with them mallets, and a lot of this wood, it ain't gonna do good enough. You beat on it with a steel hammer, you mushroom your drive spur. That's something you need to be real careful about. If you do mushroom it, bring it over here to the grinder and keep it cleaned back a little bit. You don't want to scar up your Morse taper. But the best thing I've found is, and I do a lot of this, and it may not, is go to, you know, I hope I don't hurt anybody's feelings, go to Harbor Awful, you know, and get you a brass hammer. And they're not cheap even there. But a brass hammer will set that drive spur real easy, and it'll set it deep enough. It's not going to ruin your drive spur, and it's got enough weight in it. It's not going to create any sparks. It's not going to chip anything off. it's very well worth it if you're gonna cut very much wet wood. And then you chunk this thing in here like so. I've got a good enough seat. And I've never had any real problems with anything coming off between centers much. I have definitely broke the tinion off some bigger pieces like that, where the tinion just sheared completely off of it on a 4-jaw chuck. Now that can happen, especially on large diameter blanks. But it can happen anytime, but on wet wood like that, it's soft. You know, you don't want to just run it up there and let it barely touch you. Use a cup center. Take those 60-degree points and hide them somewhere in your toolbox. If you're dealing with wet wood, especially wet wood, use a cup center. And you won't have any problems with this thing trying to tear out. We'll set this thing up here and kind of see what it wants to do. Always start your machine, you know, relatively slow. Let it build on up here. You know, that's running, you know, around 600. That is buku fast enough for turning wet wood until you begin to get it in balance a little bit. And remember that this is a half log, so you would not want to use this. You only want to use this on when the grain is running long ways with the axis of the lathe. In this particular instance, I would do this with a pull cut starting on the bark, so I'm pushing the bark into the wood. If I go the other way, I'm going to drag the bark off. So the way that's turned right now, kind of see how it's running. Just for fun, we'll see what it wants to do here. Probably tool rest is probably a little bit high for that big a tool. I'm going to look down here at the ghost line, and I'm going to get up where I need to be. And when I say where I need to be, that depends on the thickness of this tool and where the cutting edge is. So I want to be running it pretty close to the center with the cutting edge. Is where I want to be, basically with this tool. Let's see what it wants to do. Cutting wet wood or bigger pieces, after you've done a few of them, you know, you're going to get you a gouge that's got, you can tell pretty good how you are by you're not getting no hard knocking here. We're pretty well running pretty good on that. There sounds like there's one place that's a little bouncy, and that may be me getting off on my side of it here a little bit. Really, it's just not a very good cut. And I just need to come back here now. I'm going to get here and careful, and I'm going to make me a good push cut on it. Push cut helps close the drain. Rough out our blank a little bit. Now then, you can see the growth ring pattern here. See, your pith comes all the way down in here like this. So what we can do with this piece now is we can make it a smaller in diameter and gain a little bit of thickness, you know. But what we can do is we can cut our tinion to where we use part of this as the tinion, and then begin to work on the rest of it, because you're gonna waste that tinion piece off anyway. But, basically, that's about what I've got on that. Now, we can turn it around and approach the bark end of it. Let me get a smaller gouge and clean up that fuzz a little bit. And, I think one of the most important things, well, it is the most important thing, if you're going to use a 4-jaw chuck, is, and I use a dovetail chuck, I'm going to put a very slight dovetail on this, but I'm going to make extremely careful that I've got a dead 90-degree flat inside corner with no trash in that inside corner, because your chuck clinches here, and the strength of your chuck is the square to keep this thing from rocking. If it ever rocks, recut it, because it's going to come off there. It's movement that causes a problem. As long as it's clenched and it's on that shoulder, it can't move. If you've got a little bit out, then where it can flex, then you're going to lose it. It's going to do like I've had a piece do. It's going to come out here, it's going to go roll right up your chest, knock you, make your nose sore, bust your lip, you know, and if you're lucky, if you're lucky. And I've never done that except when I had a big piece on there that had a tinion shear off of it. I got a bad catch, sheared the tinion off. Okay, it's time to go.
No, you got 7 minutes.
Oh, I thought you, okay, let me cut this tinion right quick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in, because I made me a piece, I do so much of it, it's basically the right angle for the dovetail I want, and squaring out that edge. And you don't want much dovetail, you don't want to cut strength out of it. You don't necessarily have to fit the dovetail that's on the chuck. What you have to do is to make sure that this side is a little bigger than the bottom and that it fits square in that bottom right there. Now what will happen to you, especially on reinforced wood, is sometimes with wet as it is, it'll try to make those little tails come up there. Just take that in there, just, you know, ain't no big thing, just put it in there, you know, and lightly clean the trash out of that inside corner so that chuck ain't binding up on anything. Does that make sense? Okay, pull this back. And we'll flop that thing up on the chuck right quick. Y'all, if there's anything that I've messed up on, correct me. If you got any questions about what we've talked about, now would be a good time to ask them while I'm doing the mechanics of setting this up. Now, most people don't do that, but I want that chuck to be where I want it to be seized, because I turn in reverse about half the time. And I just a habit with me that I tighten everything I do. I've been a sheet metal worker too long. I tighten everything, you know. Tighten, especially in wet wood, around, because you're clenching it down in wet wood that's giving, that's moving, that's flexing. So it's like a Jacob's chuck in a drill. You tighten in all of the holes and you tighten until it doesn't want to tighten. But you do it a little bit at a time because we don't want it tightened all on one side, you know, and we worked hard to get it in balance. We don't want to pull it out of balance by over tightening too quick in one spot.
That's the machinist way.
That's the way it ought to be on everything, basically.